The Miami Dolphins have added a nose tackle, another cornerback, and an inside linebacker. It'll be interesting to see what the second wave of free agency brings this team later on in this draft. Chris Greer, the general manager, usually likes to attack every position, putting himself and his team in position to select the best player available. That's how you ended up with Chop Robinson, even though defensive end wasn't a need initially, then it became a need. But obviously, this team is shifting their position to the draft. Join me now is Barry Jackson, joining the Dolphins In Depth podcast. Barry, as you look at the roster as it's presently constructed on March 20th, in the middle of the second week of free agency, which is basically on the second and third tier of talent right now, do you feel comfortable with where this Dolphins team is?
I feel, Omar, they are where they were at the end of last season, which is fringe wildcard team. I mean, they're basically going to be competing with the Pittsburghs and the Cincinnatis for the last wildcard berth, barring something incredible, barring a Josh Allen injury that sidelines him for the season. I'm not being negative. I'm just being realistic. There's no indication that this roster is nearly as good as Buffalo's when you factor in, obviously, the huge equation of the starting quarterback. So I'm mildly disappointed what's happened in free agency. You know from this podcast and from our conversations off air that I wanted them to go all in on spending this offseason. Your point was valid that there weren't necessarily the players who warranted the big contracts, but I'm uncomfortable that cornerback has not been addressed. I'm uncomfortable that the other guard spot has not been addressed. I'm uncomfortable that they just went with Benito Jones, a below-average nose tackle again, instead of pursuing someone of higher quality. And I'm uncomfortable not knowing if Calais Campbell is going to accept their standing offer to return, because the options to replace him are just so limited. With Zadarius Smith one, there are a couple of others. There's not a lot left. Charles Omenihu from Kansas City, although not the exact body type as Calais Campbell. So I'm concerned about those areas. And also, how do we know if any of these safeties are good enough to start, Omar? Obviously, they've been productive when healthy. The Detroit safety, obviously, Ashton Davis, they've had moments. Elijah Campbell's had moments. But to me, there's
Ashton Davis has more interceptions than Javon Holland. What are you talking about, Barry?
I appreciate the value signings. I think they've clearly upgraded, obviously, one guard spot with James Daniels, clearly upgraded number 3 receiver. They have a guy who caught 9 touchdowns last year. And their inside linebackers, they'll be fine, adding Britt and Willie Gay to back up Terrell Dotson, who was re-signed to Jordan Brooks. So I don't think it's been a disaster of an offseason. I think they've made good value moves. I just don't think they've done enough. So are you more optimistic than me?
One, I want to shun you for disrespecting Artie Burns, who in year 9 could possibly maybe turn around his NFL career. 39 starts, former first-round pick. You can never underestimate the homecomings of a former Hurricane. But he's on the back end of his career. I do not disagree with you. I was doing for a column that I wrote in the Miami Herald, which is basically addressing the fact I think the Dolphins are in a good spot at pick 13. They're really pick 13 in a weak draft, or supposedly a weak draft. It's a good spot if you were good at your job. Now, that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother podcast. Now, what I don't like about free agency is that until the signing of Benito Jones, which happened on Thursday, props for Benito for coming back, you only have now 4 defensive linemen, and 2 of them began their tenure in Miami on the practice squad. Clearly, more work needs to be done. If you are going into the season right now, Cam Smith or Storm Duck are projected to start opposite Jalen Ramsey, unless you magically have this belief that Kader Kohut can be a boundary cornerback. And I'm not saying he can. I'm not saying he can't. But if Kader goes and becomes your backup cornerback, who's your nickel? Kader's actually proven he's a very accomplished, established nickel. You kind of don't want to mess with that up unless you go and draft a nickel. What makes me uncomfortable about this free agent crop of talent, and I understand there's 1, 2, the punter and James Daniels are probably, and I'll throw in Terrell Dobson, 3 proven commodities.
And Westbrook, the receiver from Tennessee, as a 3rd or 4th, he's fine.
Hold on, wait a minute. Hold on. Let's have this discussion and conversation.
Okay.
If you were so productive on a team that's basement dwelling. They've got the number one pick. If you're so productive, such a difference maker, don't you think more of an effort would have been made to retain you, especially for a minimum level contract?
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out there, Gary.
I would throw in Alexander Madison, even though his career is not what it was his first 2 years in Minnesota. He's averaged less than 4 yards per carry the last 4 years. He is good in short yardage, so he addressed a weakness. So I'll give them that as well.
They'd have to run the ball in short yardage for me to care what you're saying.
I know your big concern, and I'm totally on the same page with you, is they needed to become a dominant team in the trenches. And aside from James Daniels, nothing has been done. You wrote that a couple days ago. So
I know, Barry, but it's like I'm understand. Burn me once, shame on you. I forgot how the saying goes. Burn me twice. That's shame on me.
Exactly.
I was more concerned, but I was not surprised that they basically were like, we'll figure it out.
Right. And I'm dumbfounded by that. Remember, the most shocking thing to me this entire offseason is Chris Grier is not acting like a man whose job is on the line. It's like he knows something that we don't know, that he's GM for life, that he doesn't have to worry about filling all these needs. They can enter the draft with still 7 starter jobs unfilled, and he doesn't have to worry about anything. That's the way he operates. Now, as I've said, in some ways it's commendable that he's been disciplined. He showed integrity in terms of not spending wildly to protect his job. So you admire aspects of that. But at the same time, you also say this is a team with way too many needs to consider them a clear-cut playoff team, which is why they're a team that could win 9 games, could win 10 games, could win 8 games. They're going to probably enter late December in the hunt, right?
Hold on,
other teams for wild card berth. But you would hope, Omar, it comes down to this. You would hope in the last year potentially of the Tyreek Hill era in Miami that you would go all in, build a roster without weaknesses, keep pushing the daddy's credit card down the line. And they didn't do that. Instead, they found value signings and a bunch of needs still unfilled, and I'm perplexed by that.
Barry, as I tweeted to you today, I feel like the Miami Dolphins and Steve Ross basically was like, "Where's my credit card?
Chris Grier, I want that back." Well, there's no indication that Ross has ordered Grier to stop the spending. I've asked someone about that, and the indication I got was that there was no order to stop spending.
Barry, you put out the line.
Yes.
And it's a very important indicator, notation. While I do think that some of the contracts will encourage players to be here for 2016, you made it very well known, Barry, there is no guaranteed money associated with any deal that was signed this year that carries into 2026.
Right, which is shocking. And the reason James Daniels probably agreed to that, even as a really good player who was allowed just 3 sacks over the last 3 years, the reason he agreed to that is because he's coming off a torn Achilles. And then
I think he has $3 million associated with 2026. Let me just double check.
Per over the cap, no guaranteed money due after this season if their numbers are accurate. So Terrell Dotson, not guaranteed next year. And remember, they gave multi-year deals to only 3 players. And the third was Nick Westbrook-Akeen, who got 2 years, modest money, no guaranteed money next year. So they want their books totally cleared of free agents signed this year if they don't feel any of them are worth retaining beyond this year. With James Daniels, you figure he'd stick around unless he's just
he has $3.5 million guaranteed on March 15th of next year. So I hear you, but also factoring in James Daniel was given $10.7 million in guaranteed money.
Yes.
So
and he'll likely be here more than 1 year, barring another Achilles injury.
Yes. So it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward. But it gives you an organization the opportunity, and this is a place I want to be in, Barry. This is a place I'd like to be in, Barry, where let's say things go left, we can pivot and begin the scorched earth, rebuild, restart.
Right. And Grier is cooperating in that. But again, Grier's actions suggest this is a man who knows he is not going to lose his job no matter what happens They could be 4-13 next year. Steve Ross is going to take care of him. Again, he's acting like someone who feels that way. Do we know in his heart of hearts, does he feel that way? Who knows? Obviously, he'd never share that with us. That will always remain a secret. But that's the way he's behaved in terms of disciplined spending and getting up every morning. Apparently not all that worried that he doesn't have a starting corner on his roster besides Jalen Ramsey and Kader Kohu. Apparently not worried that there's no starting defensive end on the roster opposite Zach Sealer. Apparently he's not worried about any of this. It's both commendable in the sense that he's showing integrity through the process, but it's also kind of stunning to me.
Even if you were worried, Barry, what would he do at this point?
There's still options. He can bring in Asante Samuel. He can call Drew Rosen asked about Mike Hilton. There are guys out there who would be signed today who would obviously be ahead of Storm Duck and Cam Smith on your depth chart. He could tell Calais Campbell, look, we're happy to pay you $7 or $8 million instead of $2 million, but we need an answer from you, because if you don't give us that answer, we got to go sign Zadarius Smith so that we have a starting caliber defensive end on the roster.
Hold on.
But they're
you're putting these things out here, Barry, as if you think that a Zadarius Smith would sign here. And I will make the argument to you.
Number, he might. Obviously, not every team is going to be able to go to Baltimore, right? I know Zadarius Smith and Calais have both been linked to the Ravens. Not every team can sign with a championship contender if they want to be paid. So Dolphins are still attractive for reasons we've talked about. The weather, lack of state income tax. It's a competitive organization. This is not a team in the trash bin like the New York Jets. So there are things that make it competitive, but they obviously have to make a competitive financial offer. And
but they're also aware that they're also aware, Barry, that everybody in this organization is on the hot seat.
Yeah, but that to me, Omar, is not a factor in player decisions. It's a
factor. I disagree with you. It's a factor in player decisions if they feel the money. It's not a factor if the money is grand. Javon Holland knew he went into a poop storm, but you know what? He still got $30 million in guaranteed money. He's going to be all right. He's going to figure it out. Nobody's signing a 1, maybe 2-year deal to come in this situation to, let's say things do go left. Then they have to do a scorched earth restart. I'm going to be purged from the situation. I got to go. Even Zach Wilson, I think he had to be overpaid to be encouraged to enter this situation from this standpoint. If it goes left, you got to go learn another offense and move on somewhere else next year. Quarterbacks don't want to learn a new offense every year. That's just not an ideal situation. And honestly, Barry, and I say this to you, and I say this on the podcast, the word's out. The word is out. There are a lot of people who have lost a lot of confidence, and that includes players, in what's going on around here and who's in charge around here, and how they're building the team around here. And it's great to be highly rated for your franchise and what you do and the meals you provide and your strength and conditioning program and your medical staff. That's all great. But do the people in charge know what the hell they're doing?
Well, I mean, we have a body of work enough from both the GM and the coach to obviously be able to form opinions that are based in fact. And with McDaniel, it's clear cut. They've underachieved, but at the same time, he deserves credit for turning around Tua. He does get credit for 2 playoff bursts in 3 years. So he's a coach who's accomplished something, just not accomplished enough yet. He'll have another year to prove that. With Greer, obviously, we know the spotty track record. It has not been a debacle with Chris Greer. He's made some good picks, but he's also made too many bad ones, too many bad decisions. So we pretty much know what each guy is. I don't know what another year is going to prove to any of us. It might prove something to Steve Ross. He might need another year to know what he has in Chris Greer. Why he needs another year, I don't know. He should know now. He's got a GM, who's competent, but doesn't make enough good decisions. And he should know with McDaniel, he has a coach who turned around his quarterback, who's got a creative mind, who's liked by players, who is obviously going to represent him in a first-class way, but also a guy who has not yet maximized the talent that he's been given. So I don't know why Ross needs to have any more answers, right? I don't know why this year would influence his thinking. But to me, the first month of the season, more than any, is going to be so important, Omar. I'm so curious to see in mid-May what schedule they get the first month, because if this goes south like it has with the Miami Heat and players simply don't respect McDaniel's new way of being a disciplinarian and a hard ass,
come on, he's not going to change.
Again, this could go south quickly. Obviously,
we're hoping McDaniel's going to change. You think McDaniel's going to be a disciplinarian?
Well, he's got to try to. Nothing else worked with the tardiness and people walking all over him at times.
Hold on. I have asked around about this tardiness and all this foolishness about on the lack of discipline and whatnot. I heard, yes, we should have had more of a commitment to the offseason program, but tardiness in terms of people showing up late to practices and meetings, we just didn't see it. Now, why would McDaniel volunteer that information, Barry? That was information handed to us like a gift.
Well, I'll tell you how this started. People don't know the backstory of this. So I had heard that tardiness was an issue. And on the Monday after the season, I asked several players, was it an issue? And much to my surprise, they spoke about it openly and on the record, which I appreciate and I respect. I asked Zach Sealer. He said, yes, it was an issue. I asked Bradley Chubb. He said, yes, it was an issue. So because the questions were asked by me, and then others did as well, that's why it became publicly known, and that's why McDaniel and Greer had to address it, which was uncomfortable on that Tuesday after the season. So it's not a huge deal as far as determining where they go from here. But you and I have both had the discussion about the fundamental change McDaniel has to make in terms of how he comports himself with his team. He's got to be more of a disciplinarian, and we've had the discussion also that, in my view, and you might disagree, it's harder to go from a guy who's everybody's buddy to a guy who's going to be a hard ass than vice versa. I mean, it's far easier for Brian Flores, a hard ass, to say, you know what? I think I need to loosen the reins a little bit, be softer with my players. To me, that's not a big adjustment. But to me, this other thing is a big adjustment, because are players going to think it's genuine when McDaniel suddenly becomes a hard ass and starts throwing players out if they come late to meetings? Are they going to respect it? Are they going to follow his lead? Or are they going to say, this isn't Mike McDaniel. What in the world do we have here? That, to me, is one issue this season. I don't think it's a big issue. I don't want to overstate it, but it is an issue. Am I wrong?
With success, McDaniel will get players to respond. With failure, players will tune him out. I totally agree with you that the beginning of the start of the season, I am fully expecting, and this is the first time I'm saying it publicly, a 2015 all over again. And if players check out on him, you will see Anthony Weaver become the head of the Dolphins head coach in the snap of a finger, and then it'll be a matter of how they respond to that. The only thing that changes that trajectory is leadership from inside that team, in my opinion. Leadership from inside that team and the insertion of an absolute dominant alpha player who would be Genty from Boise State. Somebody who can come in here and, bam, change the dynamic of the team. Or maybe a defensive lineman that plays like Carter from Philadelphia. Anything else outside of that, or maybe Tua just becomes that dominant player that, take it another step further from where he was in 2023. Anything outside of that, it's going to be trouble. It's going to be trouble.
I like what you raised as far as measuring sticks of how they're going to be next year. I would point to two. I think we'll know early in the season, is this a team that can impose its will in the running game? Can they run between the tackles? That's going to be huge. We're going to see that no matter the opponent weeks 1, 2, and 3. And if we see runs being stuffed at the percentage they were last year, where the Dolphins were worst in the league in terms of number of runs that were stopped for no gain or less than 0 yards, for negative yards, the Dolphins were by far the worst in the league in that category. If that does not change, we're in for a long season. I'll tell you the one other thing that to me is going to be a very big measuring stick early of what kind of team they have. McDaniel has 8 months to figure out how to resuscitate the deep passing game. If that remains AWOL, if that remains something that's missing from this offense, then they're doomed to fail, because this whole offense is built around, as our buddy Chris Perkins would say, Tyreek Hill and the threat of Tyreek Hill. So they need to weave the deep passing game back into the offense. The most mind-blowing thing to me about last year's Dolphins team was 30th in the league in deep passing plays. Are you kidding me? With two fleet-footed receivers, two of the seven highest paid receivers in football, and Tua, who obviously had improved tremendously with the deep ball in recent years. How could that even happen? And I know the offensive line was a lot to blame because they didn't trust them to have enough time for these deep plays to develop. But still, that was stunning to me. That has to change. I'm not saying they have to be first in the league in 20-plus yard plays. The Bengals might be that, but they have to be at least top third of the league.
It's very easy. I recently heard Mike McDaniel on a Dolphins podcast, talk about, okay, the change in the approaches. Safeties took 2 steps back from where they would normally line up to give themselves extra cushion. And here's the thing. When you're effectively running the ball, Barry, what do they have to do? Teams have to put a safety in the box.
Exactly.
There was no need, no desire, no intention, no effort to put a safety in the box. And in fact, Miami was so bad at the run game that they just opted to throw the ball short in quick passes because they were pseudo runs. That's basically waving the white flag on the run game. I would love to see your analytical stats, the Dolphins with Austin Jackson versus the Dolphins without Austin Jackson. I think Austin Jackson made a huge difference on that offensive line. Austin Jackson, a healthy Liam Eichenberg. No, I'm not encouraging Liam Eichenberg to become the starter. This is a full disclaimer. I do not believe in him as a starter. I believe in him as an 8th man on your offensive line, a guy who could fill in as a spot starter for the max of 4 games and actually hold your line down. You expect him to start 17 games. You are expecting to be fired. But I believe the insertion, if he's healthy, of Austin Jackson, I believe the addition of James Daniel, who I project will probably be the right guard. And eventually, I believe the addition of a draftable left tackle who does like Laramie Tunsil and plays left guard in his first season and cuts his teeth. And I also expect the elevation of Patrick Paul, who I do believe he's going to be the starting left tackle. I do not believe that Teron Armstead is going to be coming back this season. That's just a theory. I think that if you can run the ball effectively, however you do it, find a way to do it, you can make teams respect your deep passing game because they're not playing 13 yards back. They're actually, closer to the line of scrimmage. It all starts with the run game. Unfortunately, the Dolphins could not run last season. It is what it is. They could run for
there's no question. There's no
they
question.
can run for a small month portion of the season, but then also factor in those were games without Tua. No Tua there. I'm not defending anything other than the run.
Right.
So it's an evolution. It's a shift. And even when they didn't have Tua, they still ran for, I believe, 150 yards in like 3 straight games.
Right.
Now, who's to say how it will pan out, how it will play out? I don't know. Maybe a better blocking NWI. Maybe he's a better blocker. I don't know what position he plays as a third receiver, or if Tyreek comes into the slot or Waddle goes into the slot. I have no idea. I'm intrigued to see how it all plays out. But the one thing I want to bring up to you is the age of this players, young, green, everybody except for, I believe, 1 player's under the age of 28. How did you view the addition of not just KJ Britt, but Will Gay?
Yeah, I think they're functional 3rd and 4th linebackers. Britt started 9 games for Tampa last year. Gay had a good year for New Orleans, 4 solid years for Kansas City. So I think they're fine at inside linebacker. I did want to go back to your point on the offensive line because I'm so conflicted, Omar, about whether they've actually improved dramatically, even though they have with James Daniels, even though Austin Jackson's return is going to be such a big help. The step down from Teron to Patrick Paul, with all due respect to Patrick Paul, he's a young developing player, but the step down could be so significant that it might negate what they've gained in James Daniels. And then the other issue that I know a lot of fans are thinking about is why are they leaving the other guard spot to the draft where they're basically in a position where they have to go interior line at either 13 or 48. Why are they not pursuing Tevin Jenkins from Chicago? I know you're not a big fan of his. Kevin Zeitler, one of the remaining guards. Is this a case where you respect the fact they're being patient to fill their other guard spot, or do you think it's risky? And before you answer that question, I want to share an exchange I had with Mel Kiper yesterday on an ESPN Zoom session. I asked him about who realistically at 13 could play guard or tackle for this team. And he said, Will Campbell is the guy. He said, because of arm length, he could see him moving inside. But he said, all of these other names that have been associated with Miami at 13, offensive line-wise, he does not think are realistic. So Membu from Missouri, his prediction is going to be gone before 13, not an option for Miami. Tyler Booker, Omar, the best natural guard in this draft, Kiper has him as a late first rounder or an early second rounder, which is well below what he was earlier. He's very good in the phone booth. He's a road grader. He's good in the run game.
Does not fit this scheme.
Okay, exactly. Right. That point as well. And then Kelvin Banks, who is a guy that many mock drafts had linked to Miami at 13. Kuiper said his year for Texas was disappointing, and whether he's a tackle or a guard, he sees him going late in the first round.
He is a tackle. He is not a guard, and his film in 2024 was not impressive at all.
So that's a long way of me getting into this point.
Yes.
If Will Campbell, who's a natural tackle, is the only offensive line possibility that's realistic at 13, then what are you doing waiting around to fill the other guard spot? Do you need to show interest in Tevin Jenkins? Do you need to bring in a Kevin Zeitler? Do you say, okay, well, if it's Liam, it's Liam, right? I know how you feel and how the world feels about the Liam issue. So the question is, are they making a mistake by waiting around to fill the other starting guard spot, knowing that there are fewer realistic options at 13 in the interior line than it might have appeared a few weeks ago?
Barry, I can go sign Isaiah Wynn tomorrow for $2.5 million, and he's better than most of these players that are out there right now.
Right. Health a concern, obviously.
Health, yes. I am not saying that's the right approach. And clearly, based on how they've conducted themselves, that is not the approach they're going to take, because Isaiah Wynn is still under 30, which surprised the crap out of me.
Yes.
Barry, when I looked that up and I found that out, I was shocked because his body makes him look like he's about 35. But I think he's like 28, which stunned me. I will say this, Barry. After the draft, there's another wave of free agency. There's the veterans who want to skip camp and just want to show up for training camp. That's the Calais Campbell crowd. There's the guys who are flirting with retirement, like Brandon Scherf, and I think he will retire from Jacksonville, who might wake up one day and say, damn it, I miss football, and I want to come back. I think that they're being patient. I don't. The Will Hernandez's of the world. I don't have any interest in Will Hernandez. I don't. He's not good. Yeah. He's never been good. He's a placeholder. Risner, Dalton Risner. Yeah, it's okay.
A middling guard at this stage. He played well,
but he always signs with somebody late in the process.
Right.
Yeah, signs for $4 million. Always ends up being a starter. Always on the next team to the next year.
Yes,
there are going to be opportunities to upgrade it after the draft. Everything doesn't have to be absolutely addressed, clear-cut, overspend before the draft. I'm not saying that doesn't make me feel nervous, because it does make me feel nervous. But there are a ton of guards in one. We know this team doesn't believe in drafting guards, okay? But let's just say, for poops and giggles, they said, you know what? We're going to absolutely get a guard. We're going to absolutely target a guard. We're going to draft a guard. If I'm Butch Barry, right now, I have 5 to 7 guards that I'm saying, get me one of these guys in the draft in the second or third day. Get me this guy as an undrafted free agent, and I'll make it work. My job, if I'm Butch Barry, I'm going to be fired, Barry, if I don't fix this.
It's a risky way of doing business, though, especially when you get into the third day of the draft or even the third round. Remember, Robert Hunt, the only interior lineman drafted by the Dolphins after the first round in the last century.
No. He was a tackle in college. You do not claim he was an interior lineman.
Right. Yeah. Who's become
and they draft tackles and they convert them to guards.
Right. I want to be clear about what I'm saying. I'm not ripping the Dolphins for not signing a quarterback and another guard, because as I've said repeatedly this offseason, and defensive end, as I've said repeatedly this offseason, I don't think it's fair to rip them until we know the players who are going to fill those holes. So the point that I'm making is they have left themselves very little margin for error. It's a very narrow path, as I wrote on MiamiHerald.com this week, where there are only a handful of players left on earth who are starting caliber at corner, at the Calais Campbell defensive line spot. So they've just made their job more difficult in terms of threading the needle. Maybe they'll pull it off. Hopefully they'll pull it off. Maybe they'll get Mike Hilton as a starting corner. Maybe they'll get Calais to come back. Maybe they'll find another defensive end who can share snaps with Calais if he comes back and can be a decent backup nose tackle behind Benito Jones or challenge Benito Jones. So maybe all of these things will fall into place. But the path now is so much more narrow because they did not spend money. So that is my concern. It's not ripping them because we don't know who's in those spots yet. But it is concern It's a concern.
History has shown, Barry, they are not going to put money behind guard. They are not going to draft a guard. Why would we expect them to stray from history when it's clear that's what their history is? I believe that this organization looks at a Dylan Fairchild from Georgia, or a Miles Frazier from LSU, or a Kentucky guard, and says to themselves, we can draft, we can develop, we can get them in the third round. Have your list, Butch Barry. We'll get you one or two of these guys. They've got 10 draft picks, Barry. And they can in this draft, you can easily get some more because nobody's going to want third-day draft picks. So everybody's going to trade them to you. So the meat of this draft, for those who don't understand, is probably about pick number 25 through about pick number 70. If you don't have one, the more picks you have in those rounds, the better off you will be. But as I consistently say, and I wrote in my column that's going in the Miami Herald today, the good teams, they don't make excuses about where they're selecting or how high they need to be or what round they select the player. You know what they do? They just select good players, they develop them, and then, magically, 2 years from now, those guys are starters, they're good players. Then in 4 years, they're having to franchise tag them. And everybody else in the world knows that they're good players and they want them. That's what the good teams do.
Right. You
know what the Dolphins do, Barry?
What?
They let their players graduate from the program and get overpaid by other teams.
To use the Mike Tannenbaum phrase, they sometimes graduate. I want to ask you this global question. As I've said repeatedly this offseason, to me, the only way they can possibly get close to Buffalo is if they made a series of real high-impact signings. If they cleared out to his $19 million. So I want to raise two specific players for you. I want to raise two specific players for you. If they had restructured to created $19 million and used that money on Byron Murphy, who's as good as any corner who was out there, he did re-sign with Minnesota. If they had used that money on Jonathan Allen, let's just take those two players.
Jonathan
You would be a big Jonathan Allen fan, obviously.
Yes. Okay. You're saying if they had taken the Tua money and given them
and signed those two players. You have Byron Murphy opposite Ramsey. You have Jonathan Allen playing with Calais. If Calais comes back, would that have gotten them closer to Buffalo where you would say maybe they have a chance to win the division, or would all of this been a waste of time and there's no way they can get close to Buffalo no matter what they would have done? What's your answer to that question?
It's an interesting question that you posed to me. Very specific two names. I like your two names. No. I don't know what they can do to get close to Buffalo other than become the team that they were in 2023, which was run for 2,300 yards and 27 touchdowns and set a sack record, 57 sacks. Now, could the return of Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb and the addition of Chop Robinson or development of Chop Robinson help them get to the 57 sacks? Maybe, but I think you need coverage to do that as well. Let's not pretend like Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard weren't locking things down back there and allowing those safeties to come in and be aggressive. But you asked for the defensive, you asked about cornerback, and no. Maybe if you threw me a third player, maybe if you threw me Bosa too, I would say, okay, we're closer.
So why not do that? In the final year, conceivably, of the Tyreek Hill era, you're at the tail end of this Dolphins core. Why did you not go all in and sign those three players?
Because I'm not going to give Bosa $12 million. Jonathan Allen signed with Minnesota. Let me look at what he was getting. Barry, when I saw those prices that those players got, Barry.
A starting safety there. You could throw in a starting
Byron Murphy. Byron Murphy got 3 years, $54 million, $34 million guaranteed. That means he's at $17 million a year. No, thank you.
Okay. I'm back to your point then. There's nothing then, in your opinion, and I'm not sure I disagree with you, that gets them closer to Buffalo. They're in the same spot they were with Tom Brady, where their only chance of having a chance to win the division is if the star quarterback from the team they're chasing sustains a season-ending injury. I hate to say it in those terms. Nobody wishes Josh Allen any harm. From all indications, he's a hell of a nice guy, but they're basically in the spot they were the first 20 years of this century, where you need a season-ending injury by the opposing quarterback to have even a chance. It's kind of sad, but it's just the way it is. They would have had to have built a perfect roster to compete with Buffalo, and obviously Tua would need to take another step and be healthy, and that's a lot to expect whether they spent money or not, and as it turns out, they haven't spent money.
And Jonathan Allen, we're looking at a 3-year, $51 million deal, $31 million in guaranteed money, about $16 million a year. That's not ridiculous, but I also think that Jonathan Allen is cherry picking his situation. And Miami's price would not be Minnesota's price.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to make also, Omar, as far as spending. They're spending this offseason. Again, it's disciplined. You can say something for getting values. They're spending like a team.
Fiscally responsible.
Yes, but they're also spending like a team that went 11-6 last year, right? Mm-hmm. They're spending like a team that doesn't feel like it needs to spend a lot in free agency because their core is great. They have most of their starters already. That's the way they're behaving this offseason, which I find so interesting. Now, even though we're not ripping them yet because we don't know who's going to be in those spots, I will say this. If on July 28th, Liam Eichenberg is your starting guard, one of the guard spots that James Daniels isn't playing, and if Cam Smith is your starting boundary corner, at that point, I think it is fair to criticize, because if that's the best they come up with for those two slots, Cam Smith and Liam Eichenberg, how can you not be critical? But let's wait till July 28th on that.
How much did Kansas City spend in money for outside of trying to retain their own players?
Right, outside of their guard, obviously, who they franchised, and they had to trade.
They re-signed Marquise Brown.
No, it's a good point. But they're able to survive all of that because they draft incredibly well defensively. Okay. They haven't drafted well on their offensive line, and because of Mahomes and because of Andy Reid. So they can survive that. Let's see how Philly survives it. Howie Roseman is great. Let's see all the players they lost with Sweat and with Milton Williams. Let's see how they survive it.
Pittsburgh gives up a second-round pick for DK. Pittsburgh gives up a second-round pick for DK Metcalf. They go out and they sign Darius Slay. Outside of that, I really don't think they're waiting on Aaron Rodgers to finally acknowledge that that's the best place for him. But outside of that, I really don't think that they spent tremendous amount of money. Now, Washington spent, Minnesota spent. Those are two organizations that think they're right around the corner. But I really don't look at what the Chargers did. The Chargers are nowhere drastically different than where the Miami Dolphins are.
Right. They spent on Becton. You could say James Daniels is the equivalent. So they've spent some. I was going to ask you about the 49ers. I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Are the 49ers where the Dolphins are going to be in a year or two, where they just have to get rid of half of the roster, but without having accomplished what the 49ers have, which is obviously making NFC championships and making a Super Bowl?
Hold on. The 49ers didn't have to get rid of half of their roster. They chose to get rid of half of their roster. 49ers have $45 million in cap space right now. As they presently stand. They just chose to make strategic decisions to change a roster. And I honestly don't think they're done, because George Kittle's still sitting out there on a 1-year deal. It would not shock me if he is traded on draft day. And I definitely think the Miami Dolphins would be in play. If you telling me right now, I give you my pick number 48 for George Kittle and then have to give him the highest paid contract in the NFL, I'm signing up for it, Barry.
It's a heartbeat to have a 12 personnel package with Jonnu Smith and Kittle. It's the one thing they'd be best in the league at. Right?
Yeah. So understand, I don't think that we're done there. Sometimes, and I think that this is what we're actually seeing here in Miami. Sometimes you can add players to your team and add players to your roster, and it's just not the right fit, not the right chemistry. Or sometimes you have to purge that roster because they know too much about the head coach or the situation, and you have to start with a new batch of young players. Like, I counted up the newcomers and the re-signed players, and I think we're at like 18. Then you add the draft picks, 19, should be 20 now. Then you add the draft picks, That's 10 players that are new because you're not cutting a 7th round pick.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
You're probably keeping an undrafted corner because you always seem to hit on that.
Yeah.
32 new players. Yeah,
you'll keep 2 undrafted players. You're talking about 30 new players on a 53-man roster.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Most are value signings. Most are low money players. So the question is, have you made enough impact players to emerge from basically where they are, which is an 8-9, 9-8 fringe wild card team? That is the big takeaway the first week of free agency.
The only thing I disagree with when you say 8-9, 9-8 fringe playoff team, I say to you without Tua for 6 games. Now, mind you, they are a better team with Tua. With Tua, they are in the double-digit realm, in my mind. With a healthy Tua, and a respectable offensive line. Tua could have won 10 games last year. He could have easily beaten Arizona. He could have easily beaten Buffalo. Raheem Mostert doesn't fumble in Buffalo. I don't see any reason why they can't pull off that victory. Tua can keep you in the 10-win realm. Now, the question is, can you do enough evaluation-wise, talent-wise? Can young players trend upwards? Who on this team, Patrick Paul, Chop Robinson, is going to trend upwards that'll help you elevate yourself to get into the double digits? And I don't see any reason why Patrick Paul won't elevate. I don't see any reason why Chop Robinson won't elevate. I don't see any reason why Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips coming back. Both of them are hovering around 8-9 sacks a year when they're healthy. I don't see any reason why they won't help you elevate. You didn't have any pass rush last year. And I don't want to hear anything about Chop Robinson. It was cute. It wasn't good. It was cute. Add some pass rush. Add a respectable run game to what you already have, and add a healthy Tua. You're in 10 wins. You're in the 10-win realm.
Yeah,
can you challenge Buffalo? Hell no.
Yeah.
But
so 3 wild card spots obviously are up for grabs among Chargers and Denver. If you project Kansas City to win the division, which you no longer can do with 100% conviction, but you probably can do just for purposes.
I can do it with 100% conviction.
So Chargers, Denver, the AFC North 2nd and 3rd place teams among Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cincy. 2 of those teams you're competing with for wild card spots, as well as the Chargers and Denver. Maybe you throw the Raiders in there if they're better with Geno Smith. Maybe you throw New England in there because they've upgraded this offseason. But basically it's those collection of teams plus the Jaguars if they ever get their act together, and Indy, obviously, if Daniel Jones should somehow rescue you. So those are the teams Miami's competing with for a wild card spot among 3. And at least you can say this, Omar. There's none of those teams where you say, you know what, except Baltimore. And let's just say Baltimore wins the North. So except Baltimore, there's none of those teams where you say they can't compete with them. The Chargers obviously have not proven under Herbert they can win. Denver, we don't know what Knicks is going to be like in year 2. Pittsburgh, they don't have a quarterback. At the moment, Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson are their only quarterbacks. At the time of this taping, they're going to wait, I guess, for months on Aaron Rodgers. And then Cincinnati, obviously, we know they've got one of the most explosive offenses in the league. Re-signing 2 receivers.
Defense is trash.
Their defense is a mess, and we don't know what they're going to do with Trey Hendrickson. So I guess the positives, if you want me to put on a happy face, the positives are Chris Greer's gotten good value signings. They've upgraded at 4 or 5 spots, and there are none of these wild card teams that you say are clearly better than them. Some might say Denver, some might say the Chargers. I don't say that. So at least health provided for all the reasons you just mentioned about pass rush, et cetera, they should at least be a wild card team. I feel a lot better if they sign Calais Campbell.
I don't disagree with anything you've just said, except for the last part of your claim, which was that they'd upgraded at 5 spots. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what spots are these?
Yeah,
Punter,
guard, third receiver, blocking tight end. We haven't mentioned the name Pharaoh Brown because he's a journeyman, but he's better than Julian Hill. So those 3 spots for sure. And then you could make the case. Maybe somebody over Poyer, not over Holland, but the Detroit kid or Ashton Davis. I keep calling him the Detroit kid because I've got to learn at some point to pronounce Melanfonwu. I haven't yet, but I'm going to practice it.
Okay, that's 4, Barry.
Those are upgrades.
That's 4. I got 4. You said 5.
Hey, Ryan Stonehouse, you got a better punter. How about that?
I counted the punter.
Okay.
All
right. So we're going with James Daniels. We're going with Melanfonwu, Ashton Davis over Jordan Poyer. That's 2. We're going with Pharaoh Brown, better inline blocking tight end than Julian Hill. I know it's narrowly, Ryan Stonehouse, that's 4. And then backup quarterback, Zach Wilson over Huntley, or that's... Okay.
I'm not counting that.
Oh, Nick Westbrook-Akeen. We forgot the most important one. A better third receiver. 5 areas where you're better. But I'd like to see 10 areas where you're better. It's 5 so far.
Okay, I'll accept that. We will be back next week, unless the Dolphins make some major signing or trade this weekend. We will be back next week for another edition of Dolphins in Depth, where we'll probably dive a little bit more into the draft. If you did not check out the previous episode where I talked to Simon Clancy about some of the draft prospects and what this draft is looking like, if you are a nuts and bolts draft guy, as am I, and right now I'm submerged into college prospects like Banks from Texas. Barry, I'm sorry, I would not even consider him for 13. It's a no for me. Malachi Starks at Georgia, the safety, no thank you. Not at 13.
I want you to study the Texas corner. I'm getting a lot of questions on him.
Baron gets a thumbs up.
Corner. Tell me about him next week.
Baron gets a thumbs up. He is very, very good. But I would take the Texas safety over Starks. I don't know what happened to him. They say everybody, whenever I share an opinion, people in the league will come back and they'll say, they pay attention, and they'll say, check his 2023 film. And I'll say, okay, on this one, Barry, I don't care. I'm not judging you based on how you played 2 years ago. Like, you've got money on the table right now. And anyway, but we talk a lot about draft prospects with Simon Clancy in the previous episode, and we will be back next week on another edition of Dolphins in Depth.